out of mind, we also want to provide a platform for science, because science is so instrumental and pivotal in really understanding the threats to these fragile ecosystems, but also providing solutions in what we can do about that. At the same time, we want to showcase, because we at the United Nations Environment Programme, together with other different stakeholders that we work with, research institutions, mountaineering organizations, we want to showcase and just show you what sustainable mountain development looks like on this day. And at the same time, we want to show that sports have a role to play in positive change. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce some of the speakers, and we do have one mountain hero. We do have a mountain hero initiative within UN Environment, and this particular mountain hero is the amazing Canadian who's an ice climber, Will Gard. He's traveled to so many parts of the world, and early this year, before the lockdown happened, he traveled to Tanzania to no other than Kilimanjaro. Beautiful landscape, and he's been there a number of times, but this time around it was different. He gets there, goes across the region which is called the Mesna Route on Kilimanjaro, and what he encountered upon his arrival was rather shocking. He gets there and he realizes that the ice that he had seen a while ago wasn't there. So Will is going to talk to us a lot about losing, this space and coming back and realizing how fast the change happened, but also what can be done to rethink what it is that we're doing to Mother Earth, to this planet. And so in this session, we're going to get an understanding and a sense from him, and also just get an idea of this experience of him going back to Kilimanjaro and really realizing this shift and these changes. We also have some other amazing speakers who I'm going to introduce in much more detail a little bit later, but we do have Ms. Carolina Adler, who is director of the Mountain Research Institute, an amazing scientist, a lead author for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and many, many other things I'm going to tell you all about it. We also have Professor Pantaleon Munisi from Tanzania University, who's done such amazing work and research around mountain ecosystems and really worked on these issues, published widely, interrogated this space, also peer-reviewed a lot of science, and he's going to talk to us about these East African mountain regions. Lastly, but not the least, we've also got Lindita Sheferi Salihu, who is coming from us from our sister agency, the Climate Change Convention, UNFCCC, to really tell us about, what is the role of sports in climate action. And I'll tell you a little bit more about her. So without further ado, if we do have the footage ready, the last ascent changes to Mesna Route, is that ready? We have a 2-minute little teaser for you.
I will jump in here. Thank you so much, Mzonda. We'll wait for our colleague Jessica if she's able to share the footage with sound. Thank you.
Great.
Doug's automated weather station collects data on snow depth, temperature, humidity, and solar radiation.
Okay, we can see the
technology
video.
is great for them. You're leaving.
Great.
Okay, sorry, I try again. You couldn't hear it?
Go ahead. No, we can hear it. We can hear it. We just had your documents there. If we can start.
Doug's automated weather station collects data on snow depth, temperature, humidity, and solar radiation.
Modern technology is great for them. You're leaving for 2.5 years. Yeah, that's a long time.
Do you remember the key? Is my only question.
In the 20 years it's been here, the surface level of the ice has fallen 5 meters, according to Doug's station.
So big question here is, why is the ice on Kilimanjaro disappearing?
It really seems that the ice is suffering here for changes in humidity in the atmosphere. So for lack of clouds and more clear sky, so that there's more energy received at the surface, which is causing the lowering of the glacier. So in simple terms, it's humidity. And then in the broadest sense, climate change, it's really all part of the climate system.
Yeah. I hear climate change and I think global warming. This is all about global warming.
Yeah.
But this isn't really about temperature rising. It's about the climate changing and then it being drier, so the ice here evaporates quicker.
Exactly right. And then that takes us to the Indian Ocean, which has just been warming radically for 100 years. That seems to be sort of the root cause of what's happening here.
So the whole systems are changing because the Indian Ocean is warming up.
It's wild.
It's really wild.
Yeah.
I just see it, oh, there goes my icicle. But it's a much bigger thing, isn't it?
With Doug's help, I'm beginning to understand that the ice up here is acting as an important marker of how our planet is responding to climate change.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Now, a teaser there. Now, let's hear from Will Gard. Will, your adventures have taken you around the world, and here on the African continent, the beauty of flying over Kilimanjaro, I'm always in awe. You've been, you went back and realized some changes in this adventure. Tell us what you experienced and how this kind of conjured certain emotions in you around climate change and mountain ecosystems.
Well, thank you for the excellent introduction and hosting here. I appreciate it. And you being so close to Kilimanjaro right now, relatively, I'm a little bit jealous. But yes, I think for me, climate. This is the latest chapter in an ongoing story. As a small child here in the Canadian Rockies, these are mountains and glaciers and grizzly bears and wildness. And this is where I grew up, going into these mountains. And I can still remember being 5 or 6 years old and walking with my parents out onto a glacier and the crunch of the ice and how big this piece of ice was. And I was a small child, and I remember thinking, this is immense. It will be here forever. It is so amazing. And I loved it. And I loved that wildness and that freedom and this ice. And as I grew up in the Canadian Rockies, I would go out into the mountains and I would walk around and on these glaciers and climb the mountains with my parents. And then I became a guide as I got older and was out in the mountains all the time. And I just loved it. It is freedom. It is our purest place in some ways in the world that's left. It's hard to get to. People don't go there. And I loved it. But I noticed some problems in high school. I would have these maps and it would show where the glacier was. You know, it goes here, but I would be kilometers and there would be no ice. You know, it would have changed literally a kilometer or more. And I would go back to that same glacier that I'd hiked onto as a kid, and the walk wasn't 5 minutes anymore. It was 20 minutes. And so as I got older, this very, very permanent looking thing, these massive, massive glaciers where I live were obviously changing. But I didn't really think about it that much. I thought, oh, this is natural, things change. You know, and then the maps are wrong, and the routes that I used to climb where I used to go up a nice easy ramp, now it's rock and it's harder, and maybe I have to go a different way, but this is natural. You know, it's not that big of a thing. Things change. And I would read in the newspaper, you know, 0.01 degrees by 2023 or something. What's this? It's nothing. Honestly, I didn't take it very seriously. I'm not a scientist. I'm an athlete. And I didn't look at it that way. And I didn't feel it. But as I got older, it started to become more and more obvious. There are rings around all the glaciers. It looks like you took a bath and then the bath is gone. Like, where's the glacier? And then I almost died about 10 years ago. I was climbing in a place with historically no rockfall, and a bunch of rocks fell down, and it came very, very close to killing me. And what was happening is the permafrost, the frozen areas in my mountains, it's starting to melt. And now areas that were historically very safe are just not. And these rocks going by my head, you know, finally one of them said, hey, you should maybe start thinking about this. You know, this is a problem when you almost get killed by something that should be permanent, should be totally frozen. And so I started to think about it a little bit more, but I'm a pro athlete. I get on jets, I fly places, I live in a cold place, I use a lot of carbon. You know, this is how it works, right? This is not a problem, is it? Like, this couldn't be a problem. And then in 2014, I went to Kilimanjaro, and again, the maps were very wrong. They showed these immense glaciers on top of Kilimanjaro, and they weren't there. And it really started me thinking about what was happening. If these glaciers that have been there for tens of thousands of years and in one of the highest places in the world, and they're changing, and then the ice climbing in the Alps is also changing. The season used to be months and months and months, and now it's like 6 weeks, and you can't ski below a certain altitude in the Alps anymore. And what does this mean? You know, selfishly, I'm an ice climber. Why is this happening? All of a sudden, the thing that I rely on for my sport is changing. I mean, imagine if you landed in New York or Nairobi or somewhere and half the city was missing. Like, that's what it looks like to me. And so when I went back in 2020, I wanted to learn about this and start to actually understand it, and also look at my own life a little bit more. And we arrived, and I'm very excited to do this route that Messner did 40 years ago. It's an amazing ice climb. Every picture I have of Kilimanjaro, it's this blue streak up into the sky, you know, and I think, I can do this before it's gone. And unfortunately, I got there, and that ice was unclimbable. It had changed so much. And of course, personally, this is really, really sad. It's something that I love. You know, imagine you're a football player, soccer player, and you show up to play and your field is gone. It's just not there. And so for me, it became really obvious that I can't ignore climate change. And I've also done some work in Greenland with scientists there, and then Doug on Kilimanjaro. And then you talk to the people that have guided on Mount Kilimanjaro for 40 or 50 years. And they say, oh, this glacier's not here, this glacier's not here. And we don't get 2 rainy seasons as we used to reliably. Now we only get 1. So it's a combination of science and listening to the people who live there. And it's very, very clear to me now that this is changing radically. And not only that, I'm the problem. You know, I can't pretend otherwise. I fly on a jet there. So how do I deal with this? The thing I love, which is traveling and seeing the world, is having a negative impact on that. You know, I have children, and when they ask me, Dad, what did you do about climate change? I want to have an answer. So I don't have all the simple, I don't have do these 3 things and it all stops. This is a really big, complicated problem. And I think it's also important to note that while I'm an ice climber, the world can live without ice climbing. Yeah, it's not essential. But if you're a farmer in Tanzania, or you rely on the mountains for your water in Europe, this is a much, much bigger problem. So I'm just the canary in the coal mine. They used to bring small birds into the coal mine, and when the bird fell over, the air was no good. My ice climbs are falling over. There is a problem. So now what I'm trying to do is understand how I can make a difference. What can I do? And that is one of the reasons I'm involved with the UN Environmental Protection. And it's changed my life. My first thing is to just use less carbon. We have to do this. We have to vote. We have to make changes where we can. And then all the way through, I can have a much more fuel efficient vehicle. So I'm doing that. These are small changes, but again, if we all make them, and we vote for governments that will also make them, if we have that choice, then we can make a change. And then it's down to very small things. You know, I've reduced my carbon footprint tremendously by not flying as much, and COVID is tremendous problems for many people, but it has reduced that carbon output. And I am determined to reduce my carbon footprint by at least 50% over the next 2 years. And then very small things, you know, I heat my house mostly with wood now as I can, just to try and have a renewable resource to do that. And then my chainsaw broke the other day. It's very important if you're heating your house to have it, right? Chainsaw breaks. It's terrible. What do you do? And I go into the store to buy a new one. And there's all the gas ones, but they have electric ones. And I got this electric chainsaw, and it's incredible. It really does a great job. So the big picture stuff, United Nations, governments, politics, down to what can we do at a very small level to reduce our carbon. And I don't have the answers. I am a carbon criminal, but I am trying to change that and do better. And I hope by working with scientists and using my sport, I can have a small impact going forward. And I've got a couple of other projects hopefully on the go, and I'm reducing the carbon footprint of those projects. But very proud to be involved with all of you and the people who are watching. Thank you for having me here. And I'm just, yeah, I really appreciate it. We have to come together. This is a global problem, and the UN is a global organization. So I very much appreciate the work everybody is doing. And yeah, if you'd like to check out the film, it's called The Last Ascent. You can go and see it on Red Bull TV. And Doug, the professor in that film, did a great job educating me about these problems. And I hope other people find it interesting as well. So that's my story. And I want to take my kids back to that glacier that I walked on and have it there for them. So if I can make those changes and help that, then I would like to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Will. I mean, your narration of walking into a city and finding half of it gone is actually quite a very vivid picture. You know, you're dependent on this landscape for your career, sportsman, and I'm sure so many other sportsmen and women out there, skiers, so dependent on that. And yet here we are finding ourselves with climate change, the ice disappearing and all of that. I mean, thank you so much for your story. And you really going back, I think what's even more exciting about your story is very much going back to a place that 40 years ago, other scientists, other, you know, mountaineers had been there, recorded, documented. And the way you said it, you know, I could not imagine in my mind as, you know, somebody who was born in the 70s, 2023, it all seems very far. And yet here we are in the 2020s, right? So this next speaker is an amazing and very accomplished scientist and a dear friend and a woman. Carolina Adler is the executive director of Mountain Research Institute and also the president of the International Climbing and Mountaineering Federation based out of Switzerland, a dual national of Chile and Australia. Carolina has done such amazing work. I mean, written tons of publications. She's been doing a lot of research, interrogating science on climate change and mountain ecosystems and looking at biodiversity, intersectionality, and also has been a lead author for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So Carolina is going to tell us a little bit about these intersectional elements and the changes that have happened in mountain ecosystems, and we'll make a presentation to that effect and really just give us an idea of some of this work. And she's also an avid mountaineer in her personal and free time. So Carolina, over to you and welcome.
Thank you very much, Musonda, and it's such a great opportunity to be here among not only esteemed colleagues, but also people that enjoy going to the mountains and mountaineers and climbers. And indeed, this event is really about celebrating not just International Mountain Day, but also, as Will rightly said, motivate us to also make a difference, to try and make ways to be able to collectively do something for mountains, which are a global common good. I did have some slides prepared. I wonder if they can be shared, please. Thank you very much. And before I start, I wanted to acknowledge both the hats that I carry as Musonda introduced me. Indeed, I'm working with the Mountain Research Initiative, which is a network of over thousands of researchers working in mountain regions all over the world. And the Mountain Research Initiative, or MRI for short, has been around now for 20 years, looking at the question of how global change phenomena manifest in mountain regions. My other hat is, of course, also with the International Climate and Mountaineering Federation, or the UIAA, as is known in its French acronym, and in particular representing the Mountain Protection Commission as its president at the moment. And the UIAA represents and galvanizes a federation of over 2 million climbers and mountaineers all over the world. And so I will do my best to try and bring the two perspectives as best as I can. Next slide, please. So as Musonda mentioned, not too long ago, in fact, this September last year, 2019, The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, issued their special report on the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate, or SROC. And in it, we had the pleasure to see that Chapter 2 dealt explicitly on the issue of high mountain areas. And may I take this opportunity to acknowledge the fact that the chapter itself was not just written by the 2 coordinating lead authors and the 13 lead authors that were also part of the drafting team, but also acknowledge that the review editors, the chapter scientists, and the amazing army of contributing authors from around the world who contributed to this effort. There are several reviewers as well, scientists, practitioners, and policymakers, and many from the public as well, who engaged in the review process for this report. And it's important to make mention of their participation in generating the policy relevant documents such as this. Next slide, please. So there was quite a lot of information, data and trends to analyze and look at the published literature over the course of the last 7 years in particular, to try and document what are the key changes that we are observing in terms of impacts of climate change in mountains, but also what are the likely projections going into the future. One of the key things that I wanted to highlight, and there were many key messages that were put together for this report, but as Will mentioned, the small glaciers, particularly those that are found in Europe, East Africa, and the Andes and Indonesia, were the ones that we saw particularly affected by the effects of climate change at the moment. And they are themselves also projected to lose more than 80% of their current ice mass by 2100, if emissions continue to increase at the rate that they've been increasing at the moment. And this, of course, raises a lot of questions about what does that mean for ecosystems and the biodiversity value of mountain ecosystems in particular. So as glaciers melt and the snow cover shrinks, the warm adapted plant and animals and species that are normally located further down the slope start to migrate upslope. And that also creates stresses for those cold and snow adapted species that live right up in the mountain tops to decrease and eventually risk extinction. And this is something that we're very concerned about. And especially when we have a situation where our conservation and mountain protection environmental efforts are not necessarily keeping pace with that change, which is extremely fast at the moment. So the retreat of the cryosphere, as we call it, snow, ice and glaciers and permafrost in the soil, will continue to adversely affect the recreational activities, tourism, and also the cultural assets that are well known and reported in the mountains. As Will mentioned, mountaineers and climbers have been observing these changes now for some time. And the scientific literature and the scientific data that we've assessed tells part of that story, and in fact confers with that story as well. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we really ought to be also paying attention to, rather, the fact that hazards and mountain hazards such as landslides and floods are also associated with the changes that we are seeing with retreating glaciers. And also, of course, the resources that are associated with that. For example, the water availability that are so critical for farmers and for populations, not just in the mountain, but increasingly for billions also that rely on this resource further downstream. As has been said before, also mountains are part of a system, an earth system that is also interconnected. So whatever affects the mountains also affects other systems in the same manner. One of the things that the scientific literature is also saying to us, and there is, of course, a silver lining to all of this, is that adaptation, so actions that we take to be able to deal with these impacts and address the impacts so we reduce the losses, has prospects to be effective as long as we limit our warming to 1.5 degrees. At the moment, we are tracking well above that. Unfortunately, we are tracking to reach 3 degrees. And what we want to be able to do is, of course, reduce and limit that warming to 1.5, because this gives us the best possible chance to make sure that our adaptation efforts, as well as our reduction efforts, create the conditions under which adaptation is most effective. Next slide, please. What does that mean for us as mountaineers and climbers? As Musonda also mentioned, I also enjoy very much the mountains for my climbing and mountaineering. And if I can, I take the opportunity to head to the Swiss Alps, where I'm very privileged and happy to live very close by. However, there are changes that we are seeing, and we see, for example, features such as these stairways that are becoming longer, that are becoming a lot more solid as ways to deal with the fact that the glaciers are retreating, so that we can have access to the mountaintops and continue our activity. So this also raises a lot of questions for us as a climbing community. What does it mean for us to adapt under these conditions? Will made it a very good point by acknowledging the fact that indeed the changes that we see in the mountain have very tractable and tangible impacts for farmers and other communities that rely on this resource. But mountains also have a very significant cultural and value for well-being, and mountains very much connect to a particular value very much. However, we do have to question to what extent is our adaptation, in fact, adapting to a problem, or perhaps even creating more of a problem. So I think we're at a particular crossroads where we need to be reflecting also on whether our actions have a sustained effect over the long term. And as Bill said, this is also an invitation for us to start reflecting on what we can do in a positive sense. Next slide, please. So here, let me tell you a little bit about the UIAA. Founded in 1932, it's an association that federates over 90 associations and federations in 67 countries. So we're talking about the alpine clubs and the mountain clubs that many of us grew up with, and who introduced us to many of our activities and love for mountains. And I'm very pleased to say that mountain sustainability is at the core, is a core commitment of the UIAA. Establishing already the Mountain Protection Commission in 1969. This is way before my time. And one of the key activities that we are promoting as well is the Mountain Protection Award, among many other activities. And through the support of Bali, we have the opportunity through this award to acknowledge the good practices and the great practices that are being undertaken on the ground, precisely to deal not only with the effects of climate change, but also efforts to conserve and protect mountain ecosystems and cultures and communities as well. And since 2019, the UIAA has also been a signatory to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Sports for Climate Action, which we're very proud to be able to join, because it gives us a chance also to make tractable commitments to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, as well as bring forth the perspectives and aspirations that we as climbers wish to see also with regards to policy and actions taken on climate change. Next slide, please. And here I just want to simply say a message to our fellow climbers and mountaineers and anyone who really cherishes the opportunity to be in the mountains. We want to also encourage you to participate in the dialogue, not only with scientists, but also with policymakers, and really participating in that political exchange that is needed to make sure that our vision for what mountains are and should be in the future are also taken into account. This is very important, and for the community to also to find a voice. We have to acknowledge the grief that is associated with what we see in the mountains today. For many of us, watching glaciers disappear is a very sad and worrying situation, because it forces us to think about what does that mean for mountaineering in the future. We are no longer talking about the first ascents. we're now talking about the last descent, which is also something that should trigger us to think very deeply about what it means to be and engage in mountaineering and climbing into the future. But we do have the opportunity, as I said, to turn this into a positive challenge to us, to change that narrative, to think, to imagine differently. Mountaineering and climbing inevitably will have to adapt to a new reality, but at the same time, we have agency to make sure that we address the changes and the political action that needs to also happen on the ground. Last slide, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Wow, I'm so jealous because I spent some years in Switzerland, and the one place I learned how to ski. And it's really amazing to see the picture that you showed about the staircase and how longer and longer they're growing to just try and get to these places that really, quite frankly, when I lived in Switzerland, actually really lightened me up because it was the only place I could see the sun and just get some heat and feel good about, you know, the dark winters below. And it's really wonderful. You're really the rallying cry around that 1.5 degrees. And I don't think people understand, because mountains are the spaces that really give us that signal of how fast the change is happening. Thank you so very much for sharing that. So we've had the story from Wilgard, also in the Northern Hemisphere and the Canadian Rockies. We moved to the Alps, and now we're going to Africa. And in the Eastern Arc region, which is a beautiful landscape, Will talked about the Kilimanjaro Mountains. We also are fortunate to have here the Rwenzori Mountains, Mount Kenya. I mean, such a beautiful region. And so Professor Pantaleo Mnishi, who is an accomplished academic at Sokoine University, has done such incredible research in the Eastern Arc to really understand the elements of climate change, carbon assessment, and also climate services, biodiversity assessment, wildlife and tourism within the mountains within East Africa. So Professor is going to tell us a little bit more just about this landscape, what exactly is going on, and what we also need to learn about these mountain ecosystems that also happen to have a lot of ice sheets and also glaciers. Professor Mnishi, over to you, please.
Thank you, Musonda. Do I share my screen?
Yes, I understand you have a presentation, or I don't know if our technical team have your presentation.
Yes, if you could share your screen, that would be great.
Okay, let me see. Do you see anything?
We do not see anything at the moment.
Then I'm trying to share, but there is a share here.
Hmm?
Is that screen shared? Do you see my screen? No. Then you can have something from that side, possibly.
Okay. Do we have his presentation, please, from the technical team?
Yes, I am trying to prepare it.
Brilliant.
But please go ahead and I will check.
Yes. So you can start telling us a little bit about your East Africa region.
Thank you very much. And let me tell. Yes, sure. When I was growing, I was born in Kilimanjaro, and I grew in Kilimanjaro. And when I was growing in the area in the 1960s, seeing the snow on the mountain just filled up with white cap. But then over time, I am coming to see this very rugged, like finger-like snow, even during the rain season. And this actually is very, very worrying in terms of, but also based on that, they've seen so much of the water in the rivers which are used to cross becoming dry. I was unable to cross rivers during the rain season, even during the dry season, but now I cannot do it. And that is very, very worrying also. Now, do I see my screen? Okay. Next, then I'm going to present on East Africa Mountain region. First of all, looking at the features of the East African mountains. They are diverse in origin, volcanic crystalline, diverse socioecologic systems, high rainfall areas, support diverse life forms and biodiversity, they are actually water towers. And most of these mountain areas are protected forests as catchment forests and national parks. And they have got high population because of the high fertility and rainfall. But then these are also globally, most of them being global significance, that's World Heritage. Next, please. Next slide, please. Now, what has been the climate here in these mountains? East African mountains will experience warmer temperatures. And I have seen that there is a literature saying about 5 to 10% increase rainfall from December to February, that's seasonal, but then 5-10% decrease rainfall from June to August by 2050. And this actually, to me, is what I can see there even now is happening. In the East African mountains, for example, we have a 0.5 degrees Celsius increase of up to 0.5 degrees per decade in average temperature since the mid-1960s. But then recent analysis which we did on these mountains, we found an increase of about 2 degrees Celsius over a period of 40 years. On Mount Kenya, Kilimanjaro, and Mount Rwenzori have lost over 80% of glaciers since 1900. Next, please. Next slide, please. Now you can see our study here, recent study, showing the changes in temperature from 1973 to 2012. Actually, you can see this relatively steep increase in temperatures over this period of 40 years. Next, please. Next slide, please. Now, in summary, you can see that in Uganda, Mount Rwenzori, there has been an increase of 0.58 Celsius per decade since 1960s. Tanzania, Kilimanjaro, increase of 0.278 Celsius, 76 to 2000, and an increase of 2 degrees Celsius, 40 years, 1973 to 2012. In Ethiopian highlands, there has been an increase of 0.728 Celsius, 54 to 2000, and between 2 and 3 degrees Celsius are projected between in 2040 to 2070. Next slide, please. Rainfall trends, we have most of it in Kenya since 1980s, a decrease in rainfall. Northern highlands, Kilimanjaro, Meru, Pare, Southern highlands, Tanzania, decreasing trend. Increase in extreme events, very wet and very dry years in Kilimanjaro, Southern highlands of Tanzania. Next, please. You can see now what we are talking about, impacts on attractions. Now, the changing temperatures, the decreasing glaciers actually decrease the attractiveness of these mountains. Kilimanjaro over the 1912 to 2002, you can see this what I'm calling rugged or finger-like snow by 2002. We are not sure what is happening now. We might get an information on what might be happening now with more research on this. Next slide, please. Still, glaciers on the Rwenzori are receding at a rate of 0.7 kilometers per decade, associated with rising air temperatures. And we can see that most of these glaciers are attractions to tourism, and attractions means economic growth to a country or respective country. Glaciers receded on Rwenzori mountains by about 40% between 1955 and 1990, a 35-year period, and also impacts on nature-based tourism. In this case, looking at Kilimanjaro, in the short term, the disappearing snow on Mount Kilimanjaro may give rise to last chance tourism. Yes, because people like to go watch the last snow on mountain. So increasing visitation, but eventually this loss of snow and forest cover will likely decrease the number of tourists that will come in. And therefore, it means the adventure tourism is there, but then you won't have that tourism that is related to the snow on top of Mount Kilimanjaro, and this is really very significant. Impacts on water. Generally, water flow in rivers have declined due to increasing temperature, declining rainfalls and droughts, and increased water deficits of about 27 for hydropower production in Kilimanjaro due to climate change. A consistent decline in river flow of the Kikuleto River over the past 3 decades. That's Kikuleto River originates in Mount Kilimanjaro. Annual flow reduction of 6-9% in River Pangani, which actually originates in Kilimanjaro, and 10% the River Ruvu, which originates in the Eastern Arc Mountains. Next, please. On agriculture and food security, reduced the availability of ecosystem services, especially water to both mountain and lowland communities, impacts negatively on crop and livestock production. And the increasing temperature, reduces rainfall, and changes rainfall patterns will decrease the average yield of maize by 22% in northern Tanzania. This has been predicted, and 10 to 15% in southern highlands of Tanzania. Failure of coffee growth in Kilimanjaro by 2019, and a minimum annual decrease in precipitation. In fact, due to probably temperature or climate-related diseases, coffee growing in Kilimanjaro is almost standstill. And maize and banana production will suffer reduction under same conditions, and maize, tea, and coffee decreases due to decreased rainfall on Mount Ruwenzori. Let me see.
Professor, we have a bit more time. We have very little time left. If you can just tell us. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Decreased water availability will reduce agricultural livestock productivity. That's affecting people's livelihood, people's income, both in the uplands or lowlands. Kilombero catchment and extensive floodplain in Tanzania depend on water from the Udzunga Mountains, affecting by decreasing due to increased temperatures, resulting to agriculture intensification. That's agriculture moving into the lowlands, happening in all mountain ecosystems due to increasing water flows over time. Incidence of malaria in the highlands, where it was not there, is another impact on livelihoods and health. Next, please. Glacial recession, with its negative consequence on the hydrology and vital ecological function streams, all high East African mountains will have an ecological impact of this nature. Habitat shifts, Albertine rift contracting, and upward shift areas with suitable habitats for most species, and contracting suitable habitats for mountain gorillas in the Virunga Massif. Next, please. Adapting to climate change in the mountain region, adapting crops and cultivation technologies, crop agriculture diversification, and agroecological zoning, multiple cropping systems to increase system resilience, the home gardens agroforestry system in the northern and southern highlands of Tanzania, soil fertility improvement, conservation, agriculture, farming, increased use of manure in the highlands of East Africa, strengthening agriculture extension and education on climate change and its impacts, and building adaptive capacity and resilience in local communities to variation in climate conditions, and rainwater harvesting, for example, Ndiva in the Pare Mountains. And constant monitoring is important. Next, please. Then reforestation and forest conservation to protect the mountains water catchments areas. Most of these are protected as catchment forests. Inclusion of issues relevant to mountains in national and international policy processes, mainstreaming climate change adaptation at all levels. Most countries have mainstreamed climate change into sectoral strategies, strengthening malaria and other climate-related disease control, and support the development of renewable sources of energy. Next, please. Again, strengthening integrated water source management, climate-smart agriculture advocated by different countries, and forest ecosystem conservation and restoration, natural forest regeneration, enhancement of forest seed banks, exit conservation, important tree genetic resources, catchment forest management to enhance water storage, and ecosystem-based adaptation measures to improve resilience of communities and ecosystems. Next, please. In conclusion, recommendations that climate change poses significant challenges in mountain ecosystems, ranging from ecosystem effects to livelihood impacts. Mountain regions are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, largely because of the high population density of fragile ecological systems in fragile ecosystems. Strengthening the policies and rules to support sustainable management of forest ecosystem in the mountains is imperative. Agroecosystems require special attention. Next, please.
Are we almost there, Professor?
Yes, there has been several measures taken by countries to adopt and mitigate climate change. However, they require strengthening and persistence with concrete on-ground implementation. Infrastructure development is an important to improve, need for strong governance system, particularly specific policies targeting mountains and climate change, need for forest ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. I think I'm almost moving to us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Manishi. I mean, for me, what really comes to my mind is the point that you really highlighted to say this is the home of the most amazing creatures, the mountain gorillas in the Eastern Arc, a picture that conjures, livelihood. And people need to understand that with climate change, there's a disappearance of the vegetation, a disappearance of some of the dependence on these species, but also the thing that wakes us up in the morning, the coffee. My goodness, if this coffee disappears, it's dramatic. But also, tragically, we're beginning to see, incidents of highland malaria in places where it never existed. I was very fortunate in 2008 to climb Ruwenzori to study some of the glacier recession work there, and it is really a scary sight and something to see. Thank you so very much for highlighting that. Ladies and gentlemen, for some of you that are just joining us, we've had some really fantastic presenters, and we're going to be sharing all of this information right after this event. I'm now going to introduce the next speaker, who's coming from our sister agency, the Climate Change Convention, UNFCCC, Ms. Lindita Seferi Salihu, who is actually the UNFCCC focal point on things related to sports for climate action. Lindita leads the agency's climate change work on sectors' engagement in climate action, and she's done so much work around the convergence of sports and climate action and the fashion industry, which is really amazing, but working closely with so many different diverse stakeholders, making sure that they catalyze ambitious action towards decarbonization, which is a very important topic. And as tomorrow we have the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. Lindita has an education background in engineering, international relations, and global energy and climate policy. Lindita, welcome. And I understand you also have a presentation that you'd like to share. So just tell us a bit more what UNFCCC is doing to promote climate action around mountains within the sports community.
Thank you very much, Musonda. Actually, I don't have a presentation, but I will be happy to speak about some of the work that is happening. Thank you very much for having us here today. This has been truly a very interesting event, and thanks very much to all the speakers. I guess you're all here today because you know that mountains are among the most sensitive ecosystems to climate change, and as we heard, they are being affected at a faster rate than other terrestrial habitats. And we know that climate change impacts present us with a substantive threat for everything, actually to our livelihoods, but also to mountain ecosystem services and the communities that depend on them. And so it's great that we're having such events to let people know that climate change is happening and it's negatively affecting us and things that we love, including mountains. We heard a lot about science today, but let me just remind everyone again, in just over a year, we've had 3 specialized intergovernmental panel on climate change reports. One on achieving the 1.5 goal, one on land, and one on oceans and cryosphere. And if we are to summarize those, the oceans are acidifying, the soil is degrading, crops are less nutritious, desertification is spreading, ice caps and glaciers are melting, sea levels are rising and impacting water security, and we're destroying biodiversity. So this all is really very an interconnected system, as Carolina mentioned, requiring us to really be robust and holistic in our considerations and actions going forward. In the UN jargon, this decade is framed as one of action because we really do stand at a crossroads. And I think a lot of your viewers today understand that this decade is going to be the one that will determine the fate of humanity with respect to climate change. Now, unfortunately, there has never been a greater disconnect between the need for action and reality. And at the UN climate change, we do recognize the role of influential sectors such as sports, the role that they can play to not only do better, to reflect a stronger environmental purpose, but also to be in the driving seat when it comes to setting the example and the pace for climate. And in 2018, we have convened a number of sports organizations to come together and talk about climate action agenda and how that would look in sports. So we had a serious conversations, and of course, a lot of the governing bodies and federations were involved in those discussions, International Olympic Committee as well, where we talked about, you know, how can we create a platform where sports organizations can come together to genuinely talk about ambition, about action, and can we work together to define what that best of action would look like. Currently, we've got about 170 organizations involved in these conversations. And I must say that hearing from these participants is very inspiring. There's a lot of urgency that these participants feel. They know that we all have to take action. I think sometimes there's a lot around what exactly do we need to do, and do we have the knowledge and capacity, and this is what we're trying to do within the Sports for Climate Action framework. But for those who do not know, Sports for Climate Action has two objectives. One is for sports organizations to walk the talk. So basically to reduce our climate impact as much as possible and in line with science. And secondly is to use their power, their microphones, to really bring others along in this journey and to inspire the society at large to take climate action. And then underneath that, there's 5 principles through which we organize the work in Sports for Climate Action. And those principles look at how can we embed climate and sustainability considerations in our business. So, you know, what does business as usual departure looks like? Because we're looking at transformation, not just in sports, but everywhere else. So hopefully everybody will do their part and we will be able to achieve what science is telling us to do. The second principle asks every organization to create a climate neutrality plan, you know, to start measuring your emission, understanding where your impact is, and trying to address that impact as quickly as possible. But also looking at ways in which, you know, the impact that is still there, because everything that we do today has carbon embedded in it, that we try to address that by investing in low carbon projects, especially in developing worlds or somewhere else, so that we enable reduction to take place elsewhere. And then there's other principles that look at really cascading the knowledge that has been collected already in these organizations. I know that Carolina mentioned that we are, of course, delighted to have the Climate and Mountaineering Federation involved in the conversations, because I think, as you all know, all sports are very different in their nature. So, you know, at the Climate Change Secretariat, we're learning every day, but I think it's important that they are part of the conversation, because this is how we can shape tailored action plans for all these different sports, so that action becomes consistent and we can measure it and we can celebrate it together. But we can also show that action is possible, it is happening, and this is how you can do it. The idea is really to create a positive story about sports really setting the pace for climate action, and about sports coming together and presenting a united front in front of the governments and others to say, we really want to do this because our own sports depend from the environment. And of course, we have seen with the recent pandemic, you know, what happens to sport if the external environment is in danger or is different. So definitely there's a lot of commitment that we see. There's, of course, a lot of things that we have to do to really set up a system that enables action, that climate action does not become intimidating, because it is not. It is not a rocket science. We know where we need to go. Some solutions exist, and for others, we need to really bring our brains together and come up with some innovation and some strategies in which we can still, you know, enjoy sports that we all love, but let's try and make them more climate resilient and more fit for the future. So I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lindita. Wow, I mean, the need for action, that whole bridge and divergence between action and reality. And I think if there's a moment in our human history where we have to come to sort of face to face with that, is right now, as we're living in the middle of a pandemic world when climate change impacts do show up regardless. And I think it's really a wake-up call for humanity. And thank you so much for highlighting that, you know, sports are changing, and they're changing simply because they depend on these landscapes and these fragile ecosystems that are providing us the very ecosystem services that we're dependent on. Thank you so very much for flagging that, and all the very best for all the deliberation at the Climate Convention as you clock the 5th agreement. I now would like to invite Julia Dufour of IOC, the Olympic Committee, International Olympic Committee. If you're here, Julie, to just really tell us a little bit, you know, what the impacts of some of the, you know, the climate change impacts are having on the sports industry in just a minute or two, if you're here.
Yes, hi, thank you, Mazunda.
Thank you, Julie.
Hi, and also thank you to Lindita. I hassle Lindita almost daily now about what we need to do with sport and climate. So I'm very grateful to you and to UNEP. I mean, I'm definitely no Will, but I have always grown up with mountains. I have the Alps outside my window, and I grew up in the foothills of Mount Kenya, and I also have seen the impacts personally. But if we're looking at the impacts of sport, they're becoming more and more apparent. And, you know, we're not just talking here about the lack of snow for the winter sports, we're also talking about increased air pollution for the runners. We're talking about floods. It's just multi-sports everywhere we look. We're seeing those increasingly and increasingly. But of course, at the same time, at the International Olympic Committee, we are very aware and we have a responsibility. We have a climate impact ourselves, and so do our sports. So for that reason, we partnered with UNEP last year, and we brought together for the first time all the different sports and international sport federations that hold their sports within the mountain environments to come together and say, you know, what impacts are we having of sport? What can we do about them? What do we need to adapt? And, you know, what really can we do from the sports side to listen to the scientists and get us mobilizing more in protecting mountain environments? So that work has already started, and it will go on, and we'll look at releasing a lot more next year, and we'll push it out as globally as we can. We've got 206 countries within our Olympic family, so we'll push it out to as much as we can to try and get sport to take more responsibility in climate change and in protecting the mountain environments. So very much looking forward to working with many of you on this call, and thank you for the collaboration. And the more that we can learn from the scientists who are on the call, the better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie, for really highlighting that, and lovely to see the Olympic symbol right behind your screen there. Before we go into the Q&A, I'm just screening through some of these questions, and I'm seeing that there's quite a lot of questions and we have such little time. So I'm just going to take maybe a couple of questions. I see that there is a question from Sarish Man, who's just wondering, and perhaps it's a question to all the panelists. You know, he's wondering, I don't know if it's a she or a he, wondering what the panel think about the missing link to scale up knowledge sharing between, you know, key stakeholders, as often as the experts from industry, but can sometimes be in silos from each other. So can you share some of your experiences? Is it communication, education, technology sharing, and how can they go about that? If we could start with Will. Do we need better collaboration?
I think, yes, we absolutely need better collaboration. And even on this, in our discussion here, I've learned so much from the other speakers. This has been amazing. And I want to have dinner with all of them as soon as possible. We have to get together in a climate friendly way. But if I am learning so much just in this conversation, then yes, there must be a need for more collaboration and more understanding. And as Professor Manouchi said, to get out of our silos and share this knowledge. And this has been so exciting for me as an athlete to learn from the science and to learn from the different organizations that are doing this work. So I have nothing useful to say, but I'm excited by the opportunities. Thank you.
You have a lot of useful things to say, and yes, we could potentially have a virtual dinner.
Let's do it.
Carolina, over to you. What are your reaction to that question?
Oh, I absolutely agree with everything Will has said, and that's a very good question indeed. The only thing I can say is that this very event is an example of what that missing link can be, how we can address that missing link. The fact that we are having a conversation with policymakers, with the general public, with academia and others, this is already a big step forward into that direction. I am very accustomed to attending lots of meetings among scientists or among policymakers, and I don't have much of an interaction with the private sector, for example, or with those who are tasked with implementing much of this in the local scale, the communities. And of course, the UIAA has given me a unique opportunity to interact with the climbers and mountaineers on a daily basis as well. So I think more of this is necessary, absolutely, so that we can exchange not only our knowledge, but also exchange on experiences, and for us to find the opportunity to engage also at an emotional level, because mountains are really quite evoke a lot of emotion as well, and we need to be able to engage in that.
Indeed, thank you so much. There's such emotive spaces that we sort of go and commune with nature. Professor Manishi, what is what are your thoughts around that question, around connectivity of knowledge share?
Yeah, sure. We continue research, fine, but then we should be able to synthesize our knowledge and bring it together for action. And I'm feeling that we might have so much discovered, also so much undiscovered. But at the same time, what we have has not been practiced on the ground to make real sense of adapting societies, the mountains, and everything to climate change. We have so much knowledge, we have to bring it on the ground and have it implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lindita?
Yes, thank you. Well, you know, I think as was mentioned before, and as we all know, we all share a lot of the impact, and any attempts to find solutions to that impact is going to require collaboration. And I think there is a strong realization that, at least what we're seeing when we work with different companies that are also very competitive, they look at climate change as a pre-competitive issue because they realize that it is a risk to their businesses. So I think it is for their benefit to collaborate, and they are looking for opportunities where they can collaborate on such issues, on identifying solutions, and we're seeing that every day. Certainly collaboration is not a very easy thing to do, especially when you have to deal with so many different stakeholders that come with different knowledge. But I think I haven't really seen anybody who is more advanced that is not willing to share some of the practices that they and some of the things that they have done with others. And I think that there's also a lot of appetite from those who are just beginning their journey to really learn. And what we are trying to facilitate is how can those who are a little bit behind really leapfrog by making that knowledge available as much as possible. So I think I'm very, very confident that collaboration is important, is a crucial issue in any attempt to solve climate. And I think that anything we do is very much led by that, thinking that the only way to really solve this properly is to collaborate with each other.
Indeed, thank you so very much. I think that also responds to a question from Rajesh Ravia, talking about collaboration, what that collaboration is all about. I do have another question here, which is coming from Brooklyn Rushton. So I think this probably will be our last question in the interest of time, perhaps to Carolina and also to Will. For those of you who recreate and work in mountain environments, what are the biggest physical changes you've noticed in the mountain ecosystems? Furthermore, what do you think are the biggest risks associated with mountain tourism and recreation with these physical changes? Carolina, perhaps we'll start with you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Well, there are many impacts associated with unsustainable means of recreation and sports in the outdoors. One of the things that we've certainly noticed this year, the effects of COVID-19 and the fact that many people have been now visiting the mountains and not only stressing, I guess, the mountain space itself, but also the fact that we are carrying our masks and not disposing of our waste in the way we ought to. There are now significant impacts reported with regards to microplastics, for example, in freshwater mountain streams, in places where we wouldn't think there to be necessarily an obvious impact of say, plastic waste. And yet there is now evidence of that being seen, which says a lot about the way in which our impact also travels very long distances. Not just locally impacting the mountain, but also aerosols and air distributed air pollution and other impacts that somehow land on the mountain space as well. So it's a very transboundary, and our impacts transcend long distances, and that is something that we're beginning to notice. And this is certainly something that is not just about the impacts that hikers and mountaineers make on the mountain space at the local scale, but also recognizing that we are now seeing impacts traveling quite a long distance and impacting mountain ecosystems and the resources such as fresh water. But we are, of course, we're learning from that. The UIAA has been working with alpine clubs and associations that look at the activities that our members make in the mountains. And I have to report that there are many, many excellent examples of how we are addressing that impact. And mountaineers themselves they are innately in love with the mountains, and we don't necessarily go out of our way to create impacts, but on the contrary, we are learning about what that impact entails, and certainly learning to do better. And we look forward to be able to continue that.
No, thank you so very much for that. Well, in the interest of time, I think we're coming nearly to the close of this session. I'd like to give the floor to Malcolm Wood, who is also another mountain hero for UNEP. I'm not sure he's here, but perhaps I could just introduce him, because Malcolm is actually a speed glider, one of very few people in the world that do very interesting sport. But he's also a co-producer and also part of a documentary that will be coming out in 2021, The Last Glaciers. Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And I understand that we have a teaser for you before you walk away from this event. So I'd like to request my colleagues, if we can have that teaser and watch it and just get an idea of what this film will be like, or this documentary will be like for 2021.
The young people want to be heard. We're the future, and we're who's going to be voting in 2 years, so they need to listen.
My granddaughter, I don't know if she will see them all.
The evidence, the scientific evidence, is compelling and sobering.
The Earth's going to survive. It survived worse than the human race, but it may just wipe us out in the process.
Let's do it. My name is Craig Leeson. I'm a filmmaker, and I've traveled all over the world filming the most critical issue, climate change.
That's as far out of my comfort zone as I can possibly go.
My good mate Malcolm, an entrepreneur, wants to show me what he thinks is a global problem. How climate change is affecting the environment he loves.
Epic. Game time. This is gonna be awesome.
Dave Turner will be overseeing my training. He has hands-on experience all around the world.
If you really want to get an in-depth look at climate change and how it's affecting the loss of the glacial ice, you really should come with us.
How far do you push it? How far do you know to push it?
God, my legs are shaking so much.
Ha! Well, there we have it, a teaser. Wow, I was just getting immersed into that and feeling the cold and just, you know, the crampons and everything, just ready for that epic adventure. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that's all we've had time for. It's been so wonderful on this International Mountain Day. I really want to thank panelists from Will, Carolina, Professor Manishi, to you, Lindita, and also to Julie. And we know that there's so many speakers and actors who've been watching this discussion. And really, as we sort of venture towards 2021 and entering the decade of action, this is the moment that each one of us has to do something. We have no excuse, and we cannot afford any inaction at all. I'm so looking forward to that film by Malcolm, and really just so grateful that you could spend some time to be with us today. And I think I might just take up Will on that and perhaps have a virtual dinner to discuss the way forward and how we can collaborate and really advance the agenda of mountains. It's been such an honor, and thank you so very much, everyone. Have a lovely day and be safe. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.